It's time now for the Casey Ingram Show on WSTU. The opinions expressed are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WSTU. WSTU does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WSTU. It's time to call in with your questions and comments at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. And now, here's Casey Ingram.
Good morning. This is Richard Geisinger, and I'm sitting in for Casey Ingram in the Casey Ingram Show. Casey's on vacation, well-deserved vacation, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Sandra Thurlow this morning again. I had a chance to talk to her maybe 2 months ago, and we talked about the history of Stewart from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and Sandra and I thought that it would be fun to discuss the early 1900s and what it was like to live in Stewart and what the social scene was like. And then we were going to also interject what it was like for both Sandra and I to be here in those early days. Sandra, so welcome.
Oh.
Thank you for coming back.
Oh, it'll be fun.
We also have some pictures of some historic buildings that we're going to talk about. But Sandy, what year did you come to Stewart?
My first time, it was 1962.
Oh, good. So my first time was 1959, so it was about the same time. And 59, I don't have a lot of memories, but my father had come up here, and we were moving up here from Fort Lauderdale. So let's start by looking at one of the historic buildings, and I think the first one we're going to look at is Seymour's. Is that right?
Well, we thought people did for entertainment even before our time to town.
And Seymour's was before our time.
Yes,
I think.
it was before our time, but it was a little bit into my time. I went one time, and it was a bar, a hangout on the Indian River, right where the Jensen Beach Bridge is.
So is this Conky Joe's now?
It's Conky Joe's now.
It's been modified and renovated, and
right, but it still has that touch of being laid back and natural setting.
So is that picture? Can we look at that picture up real quick? Is that up? Yep.
Yeah.
And so it was a much smaller place, but it was a kind of a open space, wasn't it? Didn't people dance there? And
they did.
Yeah,
they did like square dances,
right.
And people who didn't drink, people who did drink, and everybody enjoyed it. And the time I went, they were doing this kind of round dance, and you just got so exhausted, and it was so thrilling. And you go from partner to partner, and I can see why they enjoyed it. I do.
It's interesting because air conditioning, I think, was invented in around the early, maybe 1902. By the time it got into houses, it was 1929, 1930. So this was all no air conditioning, fans, and in the environment.
That must be why I remember perspiring.
Right. So the next slide we have is...
Well, we had several of Conky Joe's, and
okay.
Since I'm not seeing what is on the screen, but one of them showed the water, an aerial photo of the building and the bridge in that area, and people see that you can see the seagrass in the water, and that is something that has really changed during the era that you and I have been here.
Right.
That the seagrass isn't as prevalent as it used to be.
But it's really nice that Seymour's has been preserved and now is Conky Joe's and a very successful restaurant, right?
Yes. And then that bridge that was right there, that was entertainment. People would come down and stay in those trailer parks, and they would get enough fish to pay for their vacation, their summer or their winter, I guess.
Was that a turnstile bridge?
Yes, it was.
Wooden. It was a wooden bridge going across with the Jensen Beach Causeway.
And it was still wooden when I got here, and I made a mistake. I said 62. I came in 61.
Okay.
I came in 62 as a married lady.
Congrats. And by the way, congratulations on your
anniversary.
anniversary.
Yes, this is my anniversary. 59 years. So I've been here a long time.
Right on the corner there, something we didn't talk about, Sandra, was Poor Bob's. I don't know if you remember that. And Poor Bob's was a place that people came from out of town to visit.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a simple sandwich place, but it had an incredible reputation, right?
But they put enough corned beef in that sandwich that I
Right,
could
right,
feed us
right.
for a week.
Right, right.
Today, if you were getting that much, it seemed like a
Right.
pound of corned beef in one
Exactly.
sandwich.
So what's our next picture? Is it the number 2?
Well, let us just talk, and he'll
Okay.
fill in with a picture.
So Francis Langford's is right
No,
down the street?
the ones I
Sunrise.
put next
Yeah,
was the sunrise.
Okay,
and
great. Now,
no, I actually think I put the Pelican the next time.
okay, is the Pelican up?
We're confusing him.
Yeah.
So the Pelican Hotel, was that in your era at all?
No, I remember with the building's obviously still there as the attorney's office, right? Downtown
Yes,
Stewart.
Willie Gary's,
Right, Willie Gary's
big
office.
firm.
I'd never been in there. I don't think I can remember being in there when it was actually a functioning hotel.
Well, let me tell you a little about it.
Okay.
It was founded in 1925, and even Governor Martin was on the group that founded it. But then it was sold to the King family, and they're from Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee area. And many of the people from Nashville, Tennessee would come to that hotel, and fishing riders would come.
Oh,
And
yep.
they were the ones that really would promote this area as the spectacular fishing area, and in national newspapers. And so the fishing parties that would go out from the Pelican Dock were just a big deal, and that put us on the map.
Fishing it attracted people from all around the world, didn't it? And it brought people to Stewart that may have never been here before.
That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe last time we talked about how Grover Cleveland came because of fishing accidentally. And then after he came, we promoted it as fishing ground of presidents,
Mm-hmm.
and had all the brochures with that.
Right.
So
Fantastic fishing area, though. I remember stories of people going out at night in the river, and their lights on the boat would attract enough fish. Fish would jump in the boat.
that's true.
Yeah, it's
That's
an
true.
incredible story.
Yeah.
So from the Pelican was really the only hotel that was sizable back then, right? It was
Well, before they had quite a few hotels. They had the
Right.
St. Lucie Hotel and the Stewart Hotel, but that was the very earliest era. But in 1925, when they built the Pelican, that was the big deal. And the Sunrise Inn, shall we talk about that now?
Yes, yeah. And most people probably don't know where that is unless they were here for, the history. But
You describe where it is.
well, actually, Indian Street turns into St. Lucie Boulevard as you're coming east, and right before you make the turn to the north, that's where the Sunrise Inn is. And it was right next to that, the large house that's there.
Cashel.
Cashel, right? And it started there, and it included maybe today's 5 or 6 of those residential lots, maybe 8. Because I remember my mother ended up buying a property that used to be part of the guest house for the inn. And right next to us to the east was also a house that used to be a guest house for the inn. So that was a fabulous place. And maybe you can talk a little bit about it and who started it. And
Well, it really was a very old hotel that was started by Henry Sewell, and it was to develop Port Sewell. So there was a wooden building there, a wooden hotel, a very large one.
right.
And it was there in like 1912. But then in the 20s, they built a Spanish style, kind of Meisner style.
Right.
Hotel.
That's the one I remember. Right.
Yes.
Right,
And when I came to town, it was just where you went for Easter, you went for any special occasion, and the shop in it when I came to town.
Yes, I remember that now. Uh-huh.
And we played tennis there. And it was so funny. The tennis court was right across the street. Now it's a kind of dense residential area. And I never realized that a big wooden building that was by the tennis courts was the old hotel, the wooden hotel that they had moved over, and they used it for the help and preparing the linens and everything.
I didn't know that either.
So and so it was gone before I realized what it was. They used it for a burning exercise for.
But this was another example of a place for people to come. It was first class, as I recall, right?
Right.
So they would come down and fish right out the inlet, and it was a great people in the Northeast, right?
Yes.
And again, another step that puts Stewart on the map that may never would have occurred had it not been there, right?
And one of their guests was the one that got the Whitaker family to get really into the
fishing.
charter fishing.
Right.
And even today, the Whitaker fleet is right where that was built because of Sunrise Inn Connection.
Off of
and
Old St.
starting
Lucie
that.
Boulevard, right,
Mhm.
right. You know,
And
everything's residential around it, but they're both places still there, right?
Don't they say grandfathered it in?
Grandfathered in, that's the next term. Now, didn't Willoughby have something to do with
Oh, yes.
Henry Sewell?
Yes, he
Yeah.
did. And he was one of the, well, he was the first one to buy land after Henry Sewell cleared the title to the
Mhm.
Hansen Grant. And he was able to develop Port Sewell. And Willoughby and Captain Sewell's sister, whose name was Elizabeth Rogers, and then Captain Sewell started Port Sewell. And it's huge. And today we have Willoughby and Golden Gate. All of that is part of the old Port Sewell.
Did Hugh Willoughby own the house on the end of the point there by, is it North Lake or West Lake? That looks right out the inlet, right? It's an old Mediterranean 1920s house.
He did.
Right.
You're who will it be? Junior
Right.
Mar Vista.
Right.
That was his son.
That's it.
Okay. But Hugh himself had another one that was on West Lake. It was called Lagunita, I think.
Okay, that's where his son was.
Also looked out the inlet, and that's where everybody will know where the Sunrise Inn. If you just say it looked like out the inlet.
Right.
And that's why they named it that.
Exactly.
You could just see the sunrise.
Right. So what's the next picture we have is?
Are we thinking of the outrigger?
The outrigger.
Remember that.
Fantastic. Now, the outrigger has such great history. I just can't imagine the number of people that Frances Langford had come visit the area. Once again, never had seen Stewart. She had the property that went from the Indian River all the way through to the St. Lucie River. And she had her house on the other side on the St. Lucie, right? And then she had the guest houses, right?
Yeah.
All the way up next to the restaurant. I can remember going to Frances Langford's way back when it was really, kind of what it was at that time. But she, all the actors and actresses that she performed with came down and visited her, and she had the guest house all ready to go. I just can't imagine what that environment was like back then.
Oh, well, it's a restaurant that made a big impression on me. And it's so nice that Fred Ayers bought Conky Joe's.
Right.
He also eventually bought what was the outrigger,
Right.
Frances Langford's outrigger. And both of them have retained kind of their character as not the Polynesian character, but the shape of the building. So,
and as you go in there, there's all kinds of pictures of Frances Langford and Jackie Gleason and Bob Hope, and just it's a fabulous part of our history. I just can't imagine what that must have been like for them to come into an area, because the area wasn't very developed back then, right?
Oh my goodness, we were so backward as far as development.
And then Frances Langford married Ralph Evinrude. Ralph Evinrude had his testing center here right north of the old Roosevelt Bridge. I mean, the whole thing is historically very interesting, right?
Yeah, and it all ties together, how one thing led to another.
Right.
And then the hospital balls of the early era, that was a big deal when I was a young matron, and they continue today. They're called the chrysanthemum balls now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But because of the connections with Frances Langford, and we also had Vaughn Monroe here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had these wonderful balls.
Right.
And it's kind of connected to the outrigger as well.
Yeah. It's just people, I guess, don't really realize, I didn't realize the impact that those things have on your area when people come to the area and then they tell their friends about it, right? It's just absolutely incredible. We also talked a little bit about Sailfish Point, and my father was got involved in Selfish Point 1959, right? So that's when I started to come up from Fort Lauderdale and the
Tell them
history.
how old you were.
That's off the record.
No, when you came,
I was 8 or 9 years old, I think, when we came. But anyhow, he fell in love with the area and created, I think, what was called the Bradshaw Trust. They ended up acquiring the southern half of Sailfish, but the northern half of Sailfish Point was owned by, as you and I spoke about, is the the gentleman who was the partner in Remington and Rand. I almost forgot his name. And Rand used to also own the end of Kruger Creek, and he was a yachtsman and kept his yacht there. When he owned the northern half of Sailfish Point, he was the one that was responsible for developing the marina and place for his boat. But you have other history there because he started to develop it and put a beach club there called Seminole Shores Beach Club. Is that the name of it, Sandy?
Right.
And at that time, as I recall, it was a dirt road coming down MacArthur Boulevard from East Ocean. I don't know if you remember that or not, but it was way out in the middle of kind of nowhere. And but tell us a little bit about that club, Sandy.
Well, I think the beach road was actually hardtop, but it was so primitively paved
Right,
that
right.
it seemed like sand. And when I first came, my in-laws, the senior Thurlows, were members of the Seminole
Cabana Club, right?
And so my husband and I went out there, and they had the pool to use, and we were on the beach. And it's so funny now that it's Selfish Point and it's so lavish and so important. But at that time, Cliff Perry, who now has a section of the beach named in his honor,
Right.
he's done so much
Great guy.
for the community. But he was in charge of Seminole Shores, and he said, "Kids, can you imagine this 82-year-old lady remembering being called a kid? It's time to go home." Up shop. It was probably 5 o'clock, and he wanted us to clear the beach, and we were the only ones on it.
And that was the only beach club, wasn't it, at that time? I think that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There would be. We had, beach access at Stewart and at Jensen, and that was made possible by an old guy named Charlie Arbogast, who was on the commission. And he insisted that our county commissioners buy that land. And when they said, "Oh, no, it's like $25,000, we can't buy all that land," he said, "I will finance it for you." And so they ended up getting where the Elliott is, the Stewart Beach,
right.
where the Oceanographic Society is. And that is all where they're building a fire station now. But all of that is because Mr. Arbogast insisted. And we also got Jensen Beach land too for the public. That's what he wanted to make sure. At that time, because there were only the Jensen Beach Bridge to Hutchinson Island, people thought nobody wants to be out there. It's just mosquitoes, and they had no water,
right,
water service,
right,
and so. He knew it was going to be what it is today, and he wanted the public to have their part.
He had foresight.
So,
was his son Ben Arbogast?
Yes,
and that's I met Ben Arbogast.
Yeah,
they developed North River Shores.
Yes,
and,
they did.
Yeah, so that's another interesting story to talk about, right?
Right, and he owned what became Indian River Plantation. And sold it to the people from Nashville that knew about us because of Pelican Hotel.
The Pelican Hotel, right?
And all those Nashvillians that come here.
So, Sandy, what are your memories when you think about that time coming here? This what was the social scene like? I mean, was it because there wasn't much going on other than the things we talked about, right?
It was really almost laughable. But what they did have, we had a sorority that wasn't like a college sorority. It was called Beta Sigma Phi. And we had our meetings and we had our parties. And that really helped a lot. We had balls once a year. We had queens. My sister-in-law was once the Valentine Queen of Beta Sigma Phi. And that kept us going. And because now, I mean, you had children and it was harder then. Today they have stroller brigades. Have you ever seen the young mothers?
Yes, I have. Right.
With their strollers, and they're out and they're running. So things have changed.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we get involved in politics and all kinds of things now, right? So, well, we just talked about earlier before the meeting that Tom, and I want to make sure I get this right. Tom was raised in a house that I used to own on Riverside Drive that I lived in. Is that correct?
Aren't we?
1037?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's when he came here in 1952, he was 15 years old.
Okay.
And he came from Syracuse, New York. And his dad had been an attorney in Syracuse, big city law.
Right.
But he wanted to give it all up and come to Florida because they had gone sailing in St. Petersburg in a regatta in the middle of the winter. And so once they saw that it looked like Bermuda, and that's where they'd gone on their honeymoon, so they wanted to come here. And we'll finish that later if we are needing to wind up.
Yeah. We're still good.
Okay.
But that was part of St. Lucie Estates that's east of the hospital and east of Kruger Creek.
Right.
It's a great
neighborhood.
Hibiscus.
Across the street, right. We have Possum Long Center. It's on Hibiscus too. But then when I came here, and it was 1961, not 1962, and I just came on a lark at Easter time because Tom invited me, and we were both in the end of our college. He was the end of law school, and I was the end of undergraduate. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. So I just came. And when we drove down Hibiscus and the coconut trees were leaning over it, and it was a sand road, it probably had a little pavement in it, but it basically looked like an island, like in, the Caribbean. I just couldn't believe it because even though I'm a Floridian, I came from Gainesville, and it is way different than Stuart, Florida, and South
Totally
Florida.
Different environment, isn't it?
And we'll talk about that house later.
So did you fall in love with Stuart when you first saw it? Is that, or were you a little bit concerned?
I fell in love with Tom. And it seemed like it was going to be a good life. I taught school in Fort Lauderdale, where you're from.
Yep.
And so on the weekends during our courtship in 1961 and 62, we would always end up wanting to come here and go out in the boat with our relatives. And it was just more fun here than in that artificial transit. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Where Fort Lauderdale did you teach?
Well, it was an elementary school that was west of town.
West of town?
Yeah.
All right.
So it's called Rock Island.
Well, we're going to take a short break here and then come back and look at some more pictures and talk about the recent history of Martin County. Thank you, Sandra. Good morning again. This is Richard Geisinger sitting in for Casey Ingram, and I'm talking with Sandra Thurlow, our local historian, and actually has written 5 books, Sandra, on the history of Martin County. Is that a fair statement? Is it 5 or 6?
Oh, 5.
5 books. Okay, well,
What
I want to be accurate with you, and we thank her for doing that. I'm not sure where our history would be if you weren't involved and dedicated a lot of your life to finding out and researching and doing the history that we have today. Thank you, Sandra. It's really unbelievable.
Since you're saying that, I just want to say how many more people have joined in, and there are many other fine local historians and people interested in history. Alice and Greg Lockhart have done so much, and Julie Priest and Joette Rice, and we have a wonderful preservation board now that actually cares, and we just have come a long way. We
Nice.
really have.
It is nice. History is so important, especially when it's accurate.
Well,
Right? we like accurate history, right?
well, I'm the one that just said I came here in 1962 and I came in 61, but dates aren't that important.
So one of the things we talked about the last time we had a chance to speak was the flower industry. And I think we're going to put a picture up of the flower industry right now and how important that was to Stewart. I mean, there's the pineapples, and then there were the flowers. And Sandy, you talked about that.
When I came to town in the 60s, it was like it was a big city at night, because the lights, when you get to the city, there's all this glow of electricity. And what it wasn't people, it was the flower growers with bulbs that would fool the flowers to bloom on holidays. Would cover them up and make the days longer, and then they'd shine the lights on them. But it was really the flower farms were everywhere, where we have shopping centers. Cleveland Clinic is now on what was Mr. Fred Berkey's flower farm.
I remember. Yeah.
And so one thing that once the flower farms couldn't keep up with the competition from South America, that they had the wonderful land, so they weren't impoverished when they couldn't grow flowers and ship them.
So that was your answer, that everybody just used to think that flowers used to grow around Valentine's Day and Mother's Day, but that's not exactly the case, is it? Because
they do, because
of the artificial grow lights right?
And that system of growing lights under flowers under lights really was developed in the University of Ohio, but the professors were here,
mm-hmm.
and the flower growers here were trained by that knowledge that you could regulate the growth of flowers and blooming of flowers. And so we were pioneers in that industry. Really.
I remember seeing that when they were in bloom. It was absolutely beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
You couldn't. Anyhow, the next picture I think we're going to talk about is the library. Is that right?
Well, I just would. He wants to say that Casey, and
Mhm.
all you have to go to her website.
And
just the other
to see 'em.
day, I looked at the one we did
Right.
to remind myself what it was all about.
Right.
So it's preserved there on her website
Right.
of the Casey Ingram Show. But I did put a picture of the library in because I thought it would be interesting to the public, because the Women's Club founded the library, and at one time it was very close to this radio station that's right here
Mhm.
in the Potsdam subdivision
Right.
on the in this area, and it's where the Azure Apartments are now,
Uh-huh.
the first
Right,
Women's
right,
Club,
right.
and so they wanted to find, and the library was in the Women's Club,
Mhm.
so they wanted to have a library. So Mr. Pittenger, or the Pittenger Foundation, gave land for the Women's Club, and it was on East Ocean Boulevard, right next to where St. Mary's Church is.
Right. Right.
And so the library was built in 1957, and that was the only library, and it was turned over to Martin County. And so then when they wanted to build a whole series of libraries, and the Blake Library got built.
Mhm.
They worked it out with the Pittingers, and they were able to have St. Mary's Church buy the land, and so now it is part of their campus. It's the Pittenger Center, and it also has rental place for future expansion. But that was right there on East Ocean Boulevard next to St. Mary's Church, the first library.
Near where the women's club is today.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Amazing.
So
where was the first school, Sandra? Was it was that in a? I know we didn't talk about this earlier, but
well, that was the very first school was over close to where the Colorado Inn group of
right,
and it became Ernie Lyons, our editor, Stuart News. Had his house
Became
made
his
from
house, right,
the original school.
Right.
But that's really goes back to the 1890s.
right.
And then they built a school where the Courthouse Cultural Center is now.
Okay.
And so when we became a county, that was empty because the school right now that is being hoped to be an arts center, it was built in 1922. So then the old school that was where the courthouse is became the courthouse. And then in 1937, they built that Art Deco front to it. And they knocked down the old school in 1988 and left the Art Deco, and then that became our Arts Council.
And we almost lost that building when
yes.
the courthouse was actually rebuilt and
And when Andre Douane came and he said, "That's one of your best buildings. Don't you dare knock it down if you're smart." And then the architects got together and it was saved.
Right.
And so.
You know, he was when you think back about it, he was a huge influence, wasn't he? I mean, he was kind of the expert that came from out of town that put things together and showed Stewart what it could be. Because at that time, you and I've talked about this, there was nothing going on downtown. It was all vacant. And he really kind of got people interested and excited. Main Street was born, right?
Well, it had been born and it was Joan Jefferson that invited him to come.
Right.
And that's when we revitalized downtown because all the shopping had gone to the malls.
Exactly. The mall just took everything away. And she was so excited that her and McMillan's bought the post office arcade, and then the Jeffersons began to live in the post office arcade, which was really kind of neat.
They did.
I don't know if you ever saw that, but that was
yes,
was fabulous.
We had a historic home tour right there in it, and Joan, being Joan, she put a turkey in the oven so it would smell good.
Her and Peter are just great people, and I reach out to them. That's really great. So when you and Tom were mother and fathers, and your children were going to school, where did they go? Did they go to Stewart Middle? Is that?
It was Pine School was started at that time, and Tom's dad was instrumental with Mr. Harold Potsdam. Had two bright boys; they were twins, and he wanted a fine private school for them, and they built Pine School.
Oh, nice.
And so we were kind of more, I was a public school teacher, so we sent our child, Jackie, to Parker. And it was in East Stewart at the time. It was in the annex for the first grade. And that didn't go over real well with the family. And so she went to Pine School until she was in the 5th grade. And then they went to Jensen because we moved to Sewell's Point.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where they went. And then they went to Middle and then to Martin County High. Well, Martin County High.
So when you were teaching, Sandy, did you teach up here or did you stop teaching from Fort Lauderdale or did you teach in Stewart?
I taught a little. And one interesting time, because I already had a child, I substituted. And so I would, go to Parker and different places. But at one time I taught on Jupiter Island for 6 weeks.
Did you?
In
right.
their schoolhouse. Because their teacher was having a baby or something. And so that was enlightening to me.
Was that on the island itself?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They've moved it. It's still, it's all the kids went to just like one room.
Right. I remember stories of Bill Otterson, who Bill, the son, was a tennis player, and he used to go down and play a fair amount of tennis
yes.
down on Jupiter Island.
Right.
Great stories, though, right?
Right, right. Well, the Ottersons were very involved.
Right, right. So, in the early 70s, I guess, there wasn't still a lot to do in Stewart. And I can remember the Ramada Inn, right? And I was going kind of back and forth to Fort Lauderdale on the weekends at that time. But I lived at a little kind of ranch out by the turnpike that was kind of in the middle of nowhere at that time, it seemed like. But Stewart was starting to grow, and there was more and more to do. And then, of course, when my dad got interested in the Y, because there was not much for kids to do here, he got a bunch of people to get interested in it, and got Grumman to, provide a release of their land, and Monterey Boulevard got put in from Dixie to East Ocean, and that was kind of a big step. That was pretty neat.
Wonderful thing, and we can't imagine things without there. And the YMCA, Grumman had a lease on the land.
Exactly.
It was county land,
Exactly.
as you well know. So it was. I didn't realize you even had to work through Grumman, but that's great because it's a perfect location, and the YMCA is just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, well, a lot of people made that work, right?
Oh,
yeah. So we're working now into the 70s and 80s, and your kids are, getting in school, and they're getting ready to graduate. And so where'd they go to school, Sandy? When they left here, did they go to University of Florida?
Jackie did.
Right.
She was the first.
Right.
Yeah, and then Jenny, our went to Emory.
Nice.
And
right.
She went to the feeder school to get into. She was went to Oxford. It was the old part of Emory, and then she was able to transfer. It's like a junior college.
Right.
And she went to Emory, and we're very proud that she can say that she
Right.
graduated from Emory.
Nice.
And then Todd, of course, is a Gator. He
Right.
went there.
So are all three? Who's here in Stewart now?
Everybody's
here, right?
And so I feel so fortunate.
And Todd's a very successful attorney, and well, your daughter's whirlwind with the environment and the lake and South Florida Water Management District, right?
And Jenny, the one that went to Emory, she's with Cleveland Clinic, and
Oh,
she
nice.
is
Right.
a physician's recruiter. So it's a very interesting, intense job. Very proud of her too.
It's interesting because I can remember talking to people about their kids not being able to come back to Stewart because there weren't jobs. And I heard that so many times in the real estate business that, what are we going to do? I'm going to lose my kids to a big metropolitan area up north. But you are very fortunate. All three of your children are here. And, Stewart's growing enough now that the kids are coming back, right?
Oh, yes. And it's the fortunate ones. And what they're talking about is industry and things for it's still a hard place for an ordinary person to buy a home and to have a good life because it is kind of geared to the well-to-do these days.
It's expensive, and had it not been for Port St. Lucie, which has a little bit more affordable homes, working people would not have a place to live. That's tough, and I think they're
pretty
working
fancy
on it.
too now.
It is pretty fancy now, yeah. But you remember when General Development did what they did in Port St. Lucie, and that was years ago. And I'm glad that Martin County had the sense to do a 4-story height limitation and some control of their densities, and it's made Stewart and Martin County what it is today. And I give all the credit to the people who probably took it on the chin back then for wanting to do the right thing, which I think is the right thing.
We all talk about the comprehensive plan,
right,
and how we are in wise growth and that sort of thing. I've been reviewing files on Palm City and the development of Palm City, and how a young man from Wisconsin came to town and got options on all this land.
Now, you wouldn't be talking about Billy Watson.
Yes, and he sold it to all the people from Nashville.
Did he?
Really,
Right.
I mean, Indian River Plantation. Dan Maddox was from Nashville, and then Mr. Massey, who bought all of Palm City practically, was also from
That was
Nashville.
M&W Land Company, as I recall, right?
I want to
Massey
learn
and
more
Watson.
about that. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just amazing that there's a big folder that Bill Watson prepared with the land, and it's all vacant. It's it's all vacant land.
And people probably won't remember that Martin Downs Boulevard was never there.
No.
When you came into Stewart by 714, then turned on the map road, and then went over the old bridge, right?
Right.
So when M&W finally sold to the Cummings family, right? I don't know if there was an intermediate buyer.
It was, and they called it Canadian Investors, but it was Peter Cummings.
Right.
And he had, it was so funny at that time, there were people, the Chamber of Commerce broke off from the Stewart Chamber of Commerce. They started their own Chamber of Commerce. They were so anxious to have their own post office zip code. And so they did that. And they were insisting that we have a comprehensive plan because they could just see everything just out of hand. And so I hadn't realized that the Palm City people were egging us on toward planning.
Right.
And it turned out that Peter Cummings was just wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonderful development. A
Martin
series of
Downs,
developments.
Monarch, all those developments out there, right?
Yeah, and the library and the parks, and so he had to give a lot to take a lot.
Yeah,
and he was very proud of it.
Yeah, and I think Palm City turned out to be a gem, didn't it? Yeah.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
There are more people there than the rest of the place. So
you and I remember those being cow pastures, and that's exactly where I lived when I first came out here. It was way out there by the turnpike. Yeah.
Well, when we came in, we needed to find a place to live. Mr. Leader took us out there, and Bill Matheson came up on a horse. And there were a few little houses there that we could afford,
right.
But it really was a ranch.
Yeah. Well, you talk about developers. Lloyd Dutcher was another, I think, person who has left their mark in the community. River Plantation and the Buttonwood, and nice developments out on Hutchinson Island. But again, they're to scale, and I think gives credit to the people who. Sailfish Point was zoned hotel motel when they got involved in it. Can you imagine? And it became a residential community because people used their better sense, right? It's a long road going down MacArthur Boulevard to get to that.
Will you tell me how that worked about developing that?
Well, I think it was a lot of work. It was like 10 years to get the permits to be able to do what they wanted to do out there. But it was originally, and they finally, Rand agreed to join his property with the Bradshaw Trust and to present it. And once that happened, then the land planning began, and it became pretty obvious that the best and highest use for it would be a single-family residential community, to 4 or 5 huge buildings with thousands of apartments out there, which could have been, right? MacArthur Boulevard would have been not satisfactory to have that happen. So, and then they gave the land right north of Sailfish Point for the public beach access, where the really nice beach access there is with a little reef right?
Oh, it's so beloved.
So anyhow, and they become great neighbors. Sailfish Point contributes a lot to the area, and not only from a tax base, but from significant donor base out there, nonprofits, philanthropy.
Yes. Really.
So anyhow, between Jupiter Island, Sailfish Point, and Florida Power and Light, we have a number of high and corporations that would have made our tax base totally different had they not been there, because they obviously help, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
As the Taxpayer Association and you know all these details.
Yeah. Well, we get on the other side of some.
One thing I remember about your dad was that there was going to be a condominium complex right at the curve by Indian River Plantation called Santa Lucia.
Santa Lucia, right.
And somehow that became
Yeah, that was Mr. Rifkin, Avron Rifkin's project. And he gradually, after dealing with the county for a couple years, decided, and the county, I think, actually wanted the land, that they were going to make it desirable for him to sell the land and not develop it. Yeah, the Santa Lucia project was planned completely out. All the architecture work was done. So it was not easy to develop in Martin County. But
no, you see it from both sides, don't you?
Right.
And then, of course, Selfish Point, Maggie Urchella became a commissioner because she wanted to make that a park.
Yeah.
So
and that's another interesting story, because Sailfish Point's property ownership, part of it went across the inlet into the Jupiter Island Park that's there now. And the owners of Sailfish gave that portion to start that park down there on the big park on the north end of Jupiter Island.
Talk about giving up a lot to get a lot.
Right.
That's quite a bit of property.
It is, but it was only a small piece. I don't remember the size, but it actually instigated the beginnings of the park. And now it's, I think, miles of.
Yes, and with the Reed Wilderness.
Yeah, and it's a delightful park. I was there a couple weeks ago, and it's absolutely beautiful.
But Bradford Trust had the inlets, touched the inlet, right?
Right, but you remember the inlet was not ever the inlet.
No.
That was not the inlet. So I guess the ownership from the Bradshaw Trust continued across what is now the inlet and was part of Jupiter Island.
Goodness,
yeah,
that's very
I remember as
interesting.
a child listening to my dad talk about that. It was terribly interesting. So now that we've been here for this time, we have I guess an appreciation and a love for some of the people that really stood up in the past and made the area what it was. I mean, Maggie pushing for the comprehensive plan, Joan Peter Jefferson and the Macmillans. Actually putting their money where their mouth was and developing, downtown and the Lyric Theater and all those things that really make the community a community, right? I mean, that's pretty neat, right?
Right. We were talking about Port St. Lucie, which is thriving right now, but you can't have an historic downtown when you have a new city like that.
Right.
We have a historic downtown, and it gives our community such character. And I'd like to mention the Vitale family too, because and Michael Braid, because he has restored all these buildings, and Steve Vitale has made them into bed and breakfast, and he is it's all just first class, and people are realizing that it's more fun to be where the restaurants and the streets are when they come and stay instead of being
out on US 1
or something.
Yeah.
So
without these people, it wouldn't be the same, would it?
No. Aren't we lucky?
Yeah, we are. Because, just to talk about that a second, people don't realize that when the malls were built, the Martin Square Mall on Indian Street in US 1 was the first one, I believe. It was the sizable one. Ocean East Mall was the really first one. But
no, the first one was the Stewart Shopping Center up there on US 1.
Yeah.
Where we had Army-Navy store.
Right, yeah.
And then Publix, the first Publix that was here.
So that pressure, though, completely vacated downtown. It was completely empty except for one or two stores. And I know that developers were looking at trying to acquire the entire downtown. And if that would have happened, it would have turned into something that is not today. They probably would have tore down the buildings. So it's just interesting how it full circle came around. And now, you and I both said it's the jewel of Stewart, right? Oh. Our downtown, I'm so proud of it, that it's a place that, it's summer and you go downtown and there's people all over the place. It gives chills, puts chills down my back, because that's not the way it used to be.
Oh, no.
It was, you couldn't find anybody when you went down there.
And you need to pat yourself on the back. You had a lot of property and hard work, and
There was a lot of people that put a lot of effort to it, but the Jeffersons and the McMillans really stood up and did what they believed in, and that's really nice. So we have a lot of people to be thankful for, and we have we have a great town, a great community.
And you have to say, Stewart Main Street, it's still going,
Right?
and it needs to be supported. And we don't need to fight against ourselves. We
Right.
need to make sure that we're all working together, and because we do owe a lot to that organization.
And look at Sewell's Point, even. I mean, what a great community that turned out to be, right?
Right.
Henry Sewell would have never guessed probably that it would have turned out the way it did. And the Bessemer properties, all those people that contributed, the Kiplingers. I mean, it's just amazing, isn't it?
And so often it's like a reaction to something negative that makes something positive, because wonderful Indian Riverside Park, which was the Leach property, he didn't like it that Francis Langford was building those little
Cottages,
houses
right,
and all.
right,
He
right.
says, I'm going to just get rid of my land and give it to the Catholics. And then that did take it off the tax roll, didn't it? Probably.
Yes,
and
it did, right.
As in spite. And so then Sewell's Point was so it could be in charge of its own destiny. And so
Incorporated, right?
And in 1957, and it was following to incorporated short time before.
Right. And then maybe that FIT was there before, Florida Institute of Technology was there before Indian Riverside Park. And that sat there for years, not knowing what its future was after FIT decided to go back to Melbourne or Sebastian, wherever they're from, right?
It's Florida Tech. It's a big deal.
Yeah,
it really is.
It is.
And FIT was a big deal too.
It was.
And some of our leaders today, you find out that they attended FIT.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Mark Perry is one that's All right. Well, for joining me today, and hope Casey's having a good time, and I want to thank you for listening and appreciate the time.